All right, welcome back to the Pilot Factored. I'm really excited that together we were able to explore nutrition, sleep, and hydration, and how all these things come together to enable us to perform at the peak of our performance. Um, at the very beginning of all this, we had to look at the performance pyramid and use it as a model to explain, sort of a visual model to explain the roadmap to peak performance. So let's get into the meat of the subject and we'll see really how this has built a foundation for us to get here. Um, to define performance first, and I mean, we've been talking about it and everything, but how do we define it? Because it's really important to know what we're talking about here. So, performance can be defined as being in a flow where one's actions are simultaneously fluid, automatic, with a sense of power and purpose, actively achieving set goals like clockwork. It can be only attained through preparation and clean lifestyle habits. All right. As we have kind of hammered in, I hope very clearly, performance cannot be achieved without first preparation through sleep and nutrition. If we don't build up that foundation, we might as well try working out all we can, try all the mind tricks that we have. Nothing will work, guys. Sleep first, then nutrition, then the rest. Fitness and cognitive skills, along with healthy lifestyle habits, will be the final keys to unlocking peak performance. So, fitness, we can see that nutrition and sleep here are at the very bottom. Obviously, fitness comes in, cognition, and then at the very top is performance. And that's why I like to call it peak performance. All right, so going back to the basics, sleep um, is pretty sad that 20% of the US population suffers from sleep disorders. Um, that's because a long day alone can impair you in the same extent as alcohol. If you remember that, 18 hours awake will give you performance comparative, like same kind of performance that you would have as if you were drunk. If you were driving after an 18-hour day and you got pulled over by the cops, um, and they tested your blood alcohol levels, imagine that it would come up to the same amount as if you had been drinking. So imagine what spending over 30 or 36 hours awake can do, you know? Well, how is that possible? You wonder like, oh, well, no, I don't spend 30 to 36 hours awake. But wait a minute. Imagine going to bed late, then waking up early every day for 2 weeks, getting only 6 hours of sleep on average rather than 8. All of a sudden, you've accumulated a 30 or 36 hours sleep debt. One of my favorite speeches of all time by Tom or Arnold Schwarzenegger. He goes on to talk about sleep and rest, and honestly, like take it with a grain of salt because, yeah, you'll say it doesn't make sense, but I love it. He says there are 24 hours in a day. You sleep 6 hours, you have 18 hours left. Now, we just talked about this 6 hours, but I know there are many of you out there that will say, well, wait a minute. I sleep like 8 hours or 9 hours. Well, then just sleep faster, he would recommend. I'll invite you to watch that little video because it's really funny. And let's come back to this after it. The link will be up there. And yeah, just come back to the PowerPoint when you're ready and we'll carry on from here. All right, pilot fatigue, the big F word of aviation. Fatigue brings up so many things, and Opening the lid on that can, oh, will get you some looks sometimes. But we need to talk about it. We need to address it because right now it is the biggest challenge that we face. Why? Because airplanes are getting so efficient. We're able to travel such long distances, and scheduling softwares are getting so efficient at cramming in, the last very like as many squeezing in as many minutes as they can into your day or sectors that we end up facing much different, I think, scenarios than at the beginning of aviation. Thankfully, there are regulations now that are helping us with that, but they are, at best, I would call them inadequate because they don't prepare us enough for what's ahead. Pilot fatigue, if we have to define it, would be a decrease in alertness, feeling tired, sleepy, and exhausted. Exhausted is the word, when you feel bone weary. And it's important in aviation because efficiency is reduced at best, performance is impaired, and at worst, you have loss of life because you're so tired, you're not even there anymore, right? Fatigue and performance as a pilot can be very different than what most other people would experience. And I'm not trying to make us special or anything. It's just that the nature of our job, north, south, or east, west travels, or sometimes a combination of the two, sometimes or often over great distances and times. These time-related factors combined with the workload and scheduling issues put us at risk for some problems caused by fatigue that most pilots almost never face. What are the effects of sleep deprivation on performance? Because we've mentioned it over and over that sleep, fatigue has many performance reducing effects. So, on the mental side, slow decision making, for example, will be a good one. You find yourself unable to make a decision or unable to make a fast or good decision. Tunnel vision becomes prominent. You lose sight of the surroundings, you get reduced situational awareness, and your tunnel vision really gets acute. It's easy to get in a bad mood, to fixate on problems or details, to be forgetful, to have attention lapses. These are all like the mental effects, and there's many more. On the more physical side, just your body, as slow as you become to make decisions, you also become slow at reacting. Your body is just lethargic. You have reduced motor skills, right? Like degraded hands and eyes or hands and feet coordination. You start having micro sleeps. And you have reduced cardiovascular performance, meaning your heart now is working harder to keep you going. There's a lot to be said about fatigue and how it affects other things outside of just your ability to fly a plane also. And these are important because we're not just there, to kind of look over the machine, but we're also interacting with our crew member and people around us, and we have to be aware of these things. So, um, fatigue has a huge impact on that. Attitudes towards interpersonal conflicts and situational awareness are the non-technical skills most affected by fatigue. When pilots are tired, they generally perform poorly when interpersonal conflicts arise. We can all relate to that, I'm very sure. And that's not just pilots, guys. Anybody is the same. From the very young age, you see children acting out, lashing out, or being naughty. And what's the thing that people will say? Oh, they must be tired. Have they missed their nap? Well, same thing for adults, believe it or not. Yes, we act out and we must be tired. We probably missed our nap. So, this poor performance is usually a result of an inability to remain focused on a problem or situation, okay? What that means is that instead of us saying, wow, okay, there's a problem coming up, and we'll focus on fixing that, all of a sudden everything becomes personal. We become very irritable. We'll take everything personally, and that'll offend us or whatever. Where really there's a problem that we should be working together to fix. Often pilots will not listen actively to ideas or opinions of others, or even admit their own mistakes, or try to identify and resolve conflicts. Okay, we're so fixated now, we lose sight of the big picture. So fatigue is really dangerous and inherently sneaky, as it will affect us in so many different ways. Um, Mental functions decrease twice as fast as physical performance when affected by sleep deprivation. So remember that brain chart, and we talked about the mental functions on the left and the physical functions on the right. Well, all these mental functions on the left that we talked about, the inability to make decision making or slow decision making, fixation, tunnel vision, all these things will start happening about twice as fast as our physical performance degradation. Just to give you an idea, the number of motor vehicle accidents on roadways peaks between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. and then again around 3 p.m. You can see that little circadian chart slide that we had talked about a while ago. And remember that 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. is that deep sleep type area where our body really wants to rest and to dig into the restorative aspect of sleep. And 3 p.m. again is the middle of the afternoon where we have that other dip. And this is the slowest part of our day, typically physically wise, or circadian rhythm wise. So just a little idea to contextualize things. Um, Night operation is another big factor that will affect our sleep performance, or our rest. Flight crews are often required to work efficiently and safely at a point in time where the work requirements are not in synchrony with circadian rhythms, and that not only applies to flight crews, okay, but night shift. Anybody that works night shift faces the same challenges. Under worst case conditions, crew members must perform demanding tasks during the early morning hours, so that's your 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. window, when their biological functions and performance efficiency are at their lowest levels. Guys, I remember one night trying to land an airplane at just around that time. It was 2:30, 3 in the morning, in the snow. It was just, I couldn't believe I was there trying to do that. I was like, I wouldn't even crawl out of my bed and think about driving a car. Why am I there? But, it is up to us. We sign up for this. It is our responsibility to be aware of this and to prepare the best we can to face these challenges. So, one challenge in particular is that complete adjustment to night work requires at least 21 night shifts in a row with no days off. When's the last time you did that? Adjustment of the biological clock does not even commence until about 10 days after a shift change. So, in other words, the adaptation to night work is never complete for flight crews. We can never say, yeah, I'm used to it, because we never get enough, thankfully, but at the same time, we never get enough work in a row to allow our bodies to completely switch over to night mode. Another big, factor that will influence our sleep performance or our rest is jet lag. As a long haul pilot, I experience it all the time. This is one of my biggest challenges that I have to prepare for, plan for, and work around every time. Traveling westbound requires 1 day of recovery time per time zone cross. If we remember that little slide on the time givers, remember that a body has the ability to adjust or account for about 1 hour of displacement a day. So traveling west is at 1 hour per day. Traveling eastward is a lot harder and requires 1.5 days of recovery time per time zone crossed. Jet lag, in more scientific words, when traveling across several time zones, the day actually becomes longer or shorter than the 24 hours because of the time change, okay? And this is what we're talking about. Traveling westward makes a shorter day, eastward makes a longer day. Jet lag is the body's reaction because it cannot adjust the normal body rhythms quickly to the shorter or longer day, okay? Um, so yeah, eastward gives us a 1.5 day of recovery per time zone cross because of the shorter quote unquote day, making adjustment difficult to the earlier bedtime. You get there, you have to go to bed earlier. Going westward gives you a longer day, making the adjustment easier by just staying up longer. So going westward, remember we trying to extend our day, we're going to use the late afternoon light to do that. Whereas going eastward, we rely a lot on the morning light to make up for the shorter day, but we can't really use it at first because, well, we're forced to go to bed earlier at the beginning. Um, so there's such a thing that I like to call jet lag whiplash. And this is when, you go back and forth 3 time zones in days just following each other, and your body just does not know anymore what you're up to, where you are, and what to do with you. So besides fatigue, jet lag, there's a lot of symptoms associated to it. Um, a high number of time zones crossed, let's call it 4 to 12, associated with high layover duration, that is 3 local nights or more. These could be causes for circadian disturbances by jet lag. So it can be a and, or it could be a or scenario here. But most likely, if you're crossing 12 time zones, you're most likely going to have also multiple nights layover. Um, but even just crossing those 12 time zones, having your short layover and turning around is going to cause some serious jet lag. Crossing 2 or more successive transmeridian rotations in opposite directions. So that means, again, like I called it jet lag whiplash. If I'm going from the east coast of Canada to the west coast, and I stay there for 1 night, then I come back to the east coast, I stay there for 2 nights, and then I go to Europe, that's also going to cause some serious issues. Some of the symptoms will include sleepiness, apathy, irritability, impaired judgment and decision making, digestive upsets. Yes, your body clock does a lot of work when it comes to your digestive tract, and if your body clock is out of whack, so will your digestion be. And you can see that a lot of these have already been noted as some of the symptoms of fatigue earlier on. Memory lapses are also part of it. Um, Long range flights and short range flights. Now we're talking about very pilot oriented stuff, but these are very different challenges that we face, and the way that we go about them also have to be, obviously our toolbox has to be somewhat different. Long range flights are a lot of my work. Pilots report that night flights and jet lag are the most important factor that generate fatigue in long range flights, and I can totally agree to that. A common example involves 2 successive night flights, let's say Paris to New York and back. You go east or west, cross so many time zones, stay there, and then come back around. This duty generally involves 48 hours with a short layover of about 22 hours. Okay, that's talking airline pilots mostly that will do these type of turnarounds. Corporate pilots, some of us will see very similar scenarios. Some of us will see different ones, but still keep that in mind. This type of layover will wreak havoc on your jet lag, on your body clock. So in this case, the sleep taken soon after arrival, and in our case, Paris to New York, so when we land to New York, corresponds to normal sleep period. But poor quality and quantity of the sleep together with a long period of wakefulness before departure increases fatigue during the nocturnal return flight. So many words to say, you get there, you're not sleeping in the right time for you because, as we said, if we travel westbound, we stay up later. Now we're not going to bed at the right time anymore. So we're going to have maybe not enough sleep, most likely not good sleep. And then the return flight eastbound to Europe typically takes place at night, which means we're going to be really out of whack during that night flight. Short range flights is a whole different ball game. In short range flights, it's the multiple legs and the early wake ups that are the main causes of fatigue. Most pilots are not able to compensate for early wake ups by falling asleep earlier. That means you got to get up at 3:30 in the morning to make your 4 or 5 sector day. That night doesn't mean you're going to be able to go to bed much earlier than typical. So instead, we usually use about 1 hour of sleep a day. That happens. In addition, time constraints, high number of legs per day, and consecutive work days increase fatigues resulting from short-range flight operations. So a lot of the commuter pilots have this issue, or guys that are flying domestically and doing a lot of legs in a day will often face this type of problem. So for them, the idea is, you're going to work 3-4 days in a row and a lot of early wake ups. You're going to lose a couple of hours of sleep a day, and it's going to be long, trying days. At the end of this, make very sure that you've taken in all the sleep you can, recuperate from it. Same for the long range flight pilots. If you come home, make sure that you recuperate and get all the sleep you need to just get your body back on the clock. So we've sort of outlined the problems that we can face on a day-to-day basis as pilots. We need strategies to manage our fatigue. Just knowing what the problems are isn't enough, right? We need a toolbox that will give us ideas and concrete plans to tackle these problems. So, as we move forward to the following sections, we've come from exploring the problems, and now I just want to give you some basic strategies and defenses that you can use to manage or even avoid, hopefully, fatigue, which in turn will improve your performance when you're on duty, because really that's what it's all about. We want to be at the peak of our performance. We want to be safe and efficient. So maximizing pilot performance through circadian variations. Performance efficiency does not remain the same through the day, as we've talked about. Okay, it tends to increase from the normal wake up time and peak in early or late afternoon. So that's why we said around that 3 p.m. Time. That's when accidents start happening on the road again. Performance efficiency on some tasks shows a temporary decline following lunchtime, even if a meal is not eaten. Okay, so we often have that little crash after lunchtime, that little where we just want to take a nap. And I must say, like, Mediterranean countries and Africa, all these guys have it right. They just decide to take a nap. That little afternoon nap is a great idea. Performance efficiency tends to decline to a low point in the early morning hours, again, that 2 to 6 a.m. window. So there are things that we can do to defend ourselves against those disruptions. There is such a thing as the body clock questionnaire, which I'll put the link below, and you guys can look at it. And it's very basic, but at least it gives you sort of a little bit of a tool to approach your own fatigue in a more concrete way and understand where you're at. So knowing your normal body clock times for sleeping and eating is very important. If you're self-aware of your own routines, when you're on the road or when you go on a trip, you'll be more able to understand how much you're affected. by the fatigue you're experiencing. It'll help you determine how you're adjusting to local time during layovers. So there's these two questionnaires, the body clock questionnaire, and then there's a layover adjustment questionnaire that you can try and see how it works out for you. Again, I'll put the link in the description below. Exercising at appropriate times will always be a huge defense against circadian rhythm disruptions. So to me, that means if I'm on the road, I know when I exercise at home, so I'll aim to exercise at about the same time on the road. And it kind of notifies your body. It's like a little notification like ding ding, hey, this is supposed to be the time of the day it is right now. And yeah, it helps it readjust. Coordinating rest and meal periods with other crew members when you're flying is crucial. Exposing yourself to sunlight at appropriate times. We've talked about that also before, how um, early morning or late afternoon sunlight will help you adjust to either your travel eastwards or westward. Use good nap management before and during the flight. Again, there's a lot of standard operating procedures, company manuals that will allow for this. And so if you prepare and use it judiciously, you'll be way ahead of the curve. Avoiding minimizing sleep deprivation prior to the return flight during layovers is a big thing too. Okay, I've seen a lot of crews go through a layover and just get wrecked by not being able to manage it properly, by not having the right tools, by not having the discipline, and a week later and they're a complete hot mess, and then we got to go home and they got to operate that way, and it's just not good to see. um, so how to avoid that or minimize it, so that we can be ready to come home as rested as possible. Basically, what we need to look at is how many time zones we are crossing, how long we're staying there, the time of when we're returning, and personal preferences. I think there's a lot here to be said about all these. First of all, number of time zones crossed. If I'm going to go and cross a lot of time zones, like I'm going to say 5 or 6, if I'm going to Europe, for example, but I'm only staying there for one day, and then I'm turning around, minimum rest, turn around, come home, I'm really not going to focus on adjusting to the local time. I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to try to get as much sleep as I can before the return flight home. Story over, like end of the story. However, if I go to Europe and I'm going to be here for 5, 6, 7 days, now I have to start thinking, okay, well, I've crossed, call it 6 time zone. It's going to take me 1.5 days per time zone to adjust to the local time in Europe. When does it become efficient for me to adjust to the local time? If you really apply yourself, I believe that you could get used to it in that like 6 days layover, 5 to 6 days layover. You'd be close enough, especially if you apply a good eating habits, working out habits, using sunlight to help you, and all these things come together to make sure that by the end of that layover, you're rested enough, you slept enough, that when it's time to get back in the cockpit and fly home, you'll be again operating at the top of your performance. But if you let yourself slide and you're awake at all hours of the night because you don't know what to do, you're not having the discipline to decide whether you want to be awake at night and sleep during the day, which is really hard. I mean, in Europe especially, um, cities can be pretty noisy. Or if you're going to apply yourself and try to sleep through the night, be up during the day and be active, and if you just wishy-washy between the two, you're going to lose on both ends. You're going to have a terrible layover and a really bad flight home. So some people are night owls. Some people just prefer to stay on the time zone from home. And, so that means, yeah, you're going to be there for a couple of days. You're just going to have to live your life like if you were home and not see anybody else. So if you're a social person, you might want to adjust really quickly to the local time zone so you can go out with the crew. If you're not social and you prefer to just stay on your own time zone for personal preferences, or things like that, then it's your decision. But you really have to stick to it. You have to be disciplined about it. That's the biggest thing, discipline there. So again, body clock questionnaire and a layover assessment adjustment questionnaire can both be used really to help you determine your baseline prior to the trip, and then the layover adjustment questionnaire can be used to help determine how adjusted you are during the trip. Preparing for long range flight. There are some very simple strategies that we can use to plan properly. So during each 24-hour period, try to get as much sleep as you normally would at home. Okay, so if I sleep 8 hours at home, when I'm on the road, I'm gonna aim for an 8 hours night. If I'm about to start working, that means if I'm gonna go to work tonight to cross the Atlantic on an overnighter, don't nap more than 45 minutes prior to that, because it'll take you more time to recuperate than you have available. You're going to put yourself in deep sleep, and waking up from deep sleep is going to be way worse than if you had just taken a shorter nap. Um, Self-manage fatigue in a cockpit during a long-range flight by synchronizing activities so that one pilot rests while the other is vigilant. Okay, so that means don't eat at the same time. Take turns eating so that one person is always paying attention to the flying. Manage in-flight activities to reduce monotony in the cockpit and optimize rest. Okay. Alternate passive and active vigilances phase every 20 to 40 minutes with formal handovers. So that means you have control, I have control. Okay, I'm gonna rest. Um, so passive vigilance is characterized by a lower level of direct supervision of the flight. Okay, that means you're going to be eating, you're going to be napping, resting, reading, whatever it may be. Usually, I would suggest eat your meal or your snacks at the start of these phases. Activities not related to the flights are also encouraged during passive vigilance phases, like, just do a little Sudoku, read a paper, something like that. During the night, or if you're sleep deprived, then use that time to take a little nap. 20, never more than 40 minutes. The alternation between active and passive vigilance phases is the most appropriate during quiet cruise periods. Okay, so don't do it as you're climbing out or preparing to land, come down or anything like this. Keep it for when it's nice and quiet. Remember to be professional about this. Announce the end of each active, passive vigilance phase to your fellow crew members so that they know what to expect from you. Okay, so if you say, I'm going to close my eyes for a few minutes, you okay with this? You have control? They're like, yeah, okay, I have control. Now they know what to expect. And if anything happens, it won't turn to you asking you something and realize you are asleep. So once again, try not to eat during the active vigilance phase. If it's your turn to be awake for those 20, 40 minutes, I'm sure you can make it. Don't snack just because you're bored. All right, we talked about this in the eating chapter. When it comes to strategies for short range flights, scheduling is your biggest asset. Morning flights include more fatigue than afternoon flights, or alternating morning and afternoon duties. So here, organizations like in the long range flights, it befalls more the pilots, right, to prepare and to counteract fatigue. Whereas in short range flights, it's more of an organizational thing. Um, the company has more power to help avoid short range flight fatigue problems using following guidelines. Okay, they can limit the number of successive morning rosters, maximum 2 days here, limit the number of successive night rosters to 3 days, alternate morning and afternoon roster instead of using all morning, so like 2 days of morning and 2 afternoon. Avoid short nights off that finish late and start early. All right, a lot of those I've seen, they call sort of a split duty day where you land, it's 12:30 at night. You get to the hotel, it's 1, and it's a split duty day, which means you get 4 or 5 hours of sleep at the hotel, then you got to show up for a 5 a.m. wake up call, 5 a.m., take off. These are the worst, guys. Avoid short stopovers, so less than 30 minutes the problem with those is that they don't take into account unexpected events and or the need for the crews to just simply have a break. So you rush, 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 stress, 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 and it puts a lot of stress on your mind and your body. In corporate aviation, this might not sell well. Okay, I understand that if our sales team tells our clients, well, yes, you're landing for fuel, but you're gonna need to, put in time for the crews to have a break. No, time is money. I understand that, but sales and dispatchers need to be aware of the limitations and the implications, nonetheless. Now, the biggest single step that can be taken towards regaining control of your sleep is routine. That means discipline. Okay, it takes discipline to manage a routine. Setting up and following a rigorous morning routine will benefit the mind and the body in many, many ways. By setting and following a morning routine, the mind receives or perceives that very first action of getting up as the first success of the day. You're setting the tone for your day, and that tone is success. It will mold the rest of the day into a disciplined, coherent pattern, leading all the way to your target bedtime routine. All right? Discipline, guys, discipline and routine will free you. Honestly, it's not just mumbo jumbo. It's not, feeling good words. Um, there's a lot to be said here about discipline. Now, food and fitness both have a tremendous impact on the morning routine. Like I said, I'll use fitness, even if it's going jogging for a little bit, as a way to really recalibrate my body clock to the new time zone. When it comes to eating protein-rich breakfast will really jumpstart your energy. So using the right eating habits when you're on the road to help your body and your brain kind of readapt really quickly. Following the same morning workout routine, like I said, while on the road helps your body clock adapt much quicker. Um, Now, we have tackled sleep and fatigue. We have explored defense strategies and planning strategies that will allow us to kind of counter fatigue when we're on the road, because this is a big thing. And as I said, it's the very bottom of our performance pyramid. It starts at sleep. Moving from sleep, we're going to now explore eating and how eating directly impacts our performance level. So we understand now, we have the basic understanding of healthy eating. Now we're going to translate that knowledge into skill. Okay, so imagine your body is a big engine block, or jet engine or anything like that. Like any engine, fuel is key, and maintenance obviously. So nutrition is the most essential component of an individual's performance. Yes, because now you've mastered sleep, you're ready to move on to eating, to nutrition, and guys, whether it's mental or physical performance, nutrition will have a huge impact on how this comes out. Nutrition creates or a balance in nutrition creates a balance of hormones and ensures peak levels of mood, energy, and biological processes. Sleep-wise, different foods can affect your ability even to fall asleep and the quality of the sleep itself. So it's sort of a self-feeding loop here. Eat well so you can sleep well. Sleeping well affects, again, the way that you process the food and also what food you're craving for. As I said, without the proper fuel, achieving any sort of performance goal is impossible. Okay, what and when you eat is going to determine your body's ability to push through those demanding tasks. So fatigue results in part from decrease in the stock of carbohydrates. As we remember that from our nutrition chapter, our carb macro is carbohydrates is the basic fuel of the body. So fatigue in part results from a decrease in the stock of carbs or glucose in the body. Eating habits and their impact on nutrition can be related to pilot performance, therefore, and safety. Okay, because knowing what to eat, when to eat it, will have, again, as we see. All right, so here's a little chart here to kind of visualize everything, and how our eating is crucially important to your performance. So we said fatigue is a result in part of reducing stock in carbs in our body, glucose. That's because a pilot during a long haul flight will burn roughly 200 calories per hour. Okay, so since the stock of carbohydrates in a typical human provides a storehouse of about 2,500 calories, or roughly a day's worth, the desired glucose blood concentration, or glycemia, can be maintained for approximately 8 to 10 hours between two meals. For a man strictly at rest, that means sitting down, not doing anything, you can go 8 to 10 hours between two meals and your blood sugar levels to be okay. But even light physical or mental effort increases the body's need for sugar, for glucose, or in other words, for carbohydrates. We will burn about 150 calories per hour just as a nominal workload, like barely doing anything. That means we'll be now reducing that window to 4 to 5 hours instead of 8 to 10 hours before decreased cognitive performance and fatigue happen from a lack of carbohydrates, from digging into that storehouse of carbs or sugar in our body. Therefore, food intake is necessary after 3 or 4 hours of flight, because you don't want to start eating when you're already in deficit, right? You don't want to start re-ingesting carbohydrates, because you're going to need your body's going to need time to process it also. So, all this to say, at full rest, 8 to 10 hours. If you were sleeping, that's why you can go 8 to 10 hours between, dinner and breakfast with no problems. Then you start working a little, very nominally, all of a sudden you've reduced that window, you've halved that window. Now, if you're at work, you're working around a little bit, you're, even mental capacity and everything, just keep in mind that now you have a 3 to 4 hour window between meals on flight. And I'm not saying like huge meals, but just eating. So what to eat? Mental performance must be maintained again by an appropriate nutritional approach. Now, like I said, we've covered the sleeping. Now we're talking about the eating and how this can help our mental performance. A meal rich in proteins that we've talked about, like protein-rich breakfast, for example, improves the cognitive performance of those who are fatigued. Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist here in Toronto, expands the link between sleep and breakfast routine, for example, in his bestseller book, The 12 Rules for Life, explaining that people who have complex and demanding jobs, ding, 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 need the protein boost in the morning. He says we hypersecrete insulin because of our job's demanding task. Okay, that's because of the cortisol levels, the stress level in our body. The associated stress, like I said, produces cortisol, and that functions to increase blood sugars in times of stress, so we have extra energy. Okay, so really it's the body's like defense mechanism, but it works against us. Extra blood sugar means extra insulin production to carry it around. That extra insulin, as Jordan Peterson says, will mop up our blood sugar since the last time we ate. Okay, so if you work, you're stressed out, all of a sudden, boom, you are digging deep into those sugar levels in your body. Now, take sleep. which is basically forced fasting. So without the boost of a good breakfast, we become really a bit unstable, right? And I can attest to that. So therefore, he recommends a high protein, high fat breakfast as soon as possible after waking. And remember that simple carbs or sugars will only create a temporary spike. So you want high protein with good fats and fill in the rest with like rich, complex carbohydrates. Stay away from the sugar. Now, eating simple again or complex carbs will lead to decreased level of alertness 30 to 60 minutes after intake. So that power bar that you had, for example, because you were hungry right now, that protein bar that you think was a great idea, that's full of added sugar, well, it'll fill you up right now, but 30 to 60 minutes from now, you'll feel the crash again. Taking carbohydrates, while favorable to physical performance, can lead to decreased level to cognitive performance. Um, and that's again, if we go for the wrong type, that will incite a spike response rather than a nice gradated response in our blood. All right, so these considerations of nutritional physiology lead us to the following principles to follow when flying long-haul flights. Before the flight, I would say begin a long-haul flight with a high stockpile of energy. That means make sure you've had a good meal. Consume sufficiently long before the flight that it will not induce any drowsiness, because obviously um, you don't want to put yourself in a place where you're gonna, get to work or start working, and all of a sudden you're like crashing. So before a flight, dinner before the flight, the day before the flight, will be like your spaghetti party. Lots of pasta or potatoes and good lean protein, for example, like meat or fish, and a nice healthy fat dessert. Um, just before the flight, you get there, you're getting to the airplane, and you're doing your planning, or your prepping, anything that's easy to digest, okay? But rich in calories, like an egg, cheese, white meat, some whole wheat bread with a little bit of butter, or even like a small bowl of cereal, for example. Get your water in, that bottle of water. Here, you want to avoid fresh fruits, pastries, cream-based desserts. Why are we trying to stay away from the fresh fruits and the pastries? Because of the simple carbs, the sugars, which will create a crash shortly after. During the flight, if the flight lasts more than 3 hours, which we said that 3 or 4 hour window that we needed to eat between two meals, then food intake should be scheduled during the flight. Now you notice it says scheduled. That means plan it and be disciplined about how you do it. So during the flight, if it's over 2 hours only, I would say just have a light snack. Remember what we talked about earlier in the nutrition. Light snack or a snack would be considered for me anything that's under 400 calories. Under 400 calories, I'll say, yeah, that's a snack. Over 400 calories is something I would call a meal. Flights up to 4 hours, um, you can stick to like your, energy bars, for example, cereal-based energy bars. Avoid the high energy like sports bars because they are packed in simple carbs and they're meant for athletes that need that boost very momentarily and that are okay with, the ensuing crash after because they have strategies to deal with that down the road. So those high energy sports bar guys, they're not meant for most people. They're really meant for athletes, okay? Runners and stuff like that. You want to stick to something that has more protein based, complex carbs. Rehydration with water. You can think about it, make sure that you're staying hydrated. Again, we said that, 500 milliliter bottle per hour. But at the very minimum, consume at least minimum a cup of water every 4 hours. That's very minimal. So any flights over 4 hours, plan your snacks every 2 hours after the first 2 hours. So you fly 2 hours, plan a small snack, fly another 2 hours, plan your next snack, and so on and so forth. Keep it to multiple light meals. You don't want to have a big meal on the airplane. After the flight, you can go to a slightly bigger meal now, 600 to 800 calories, and then following that, later at the end of the day with a big, nice meal. So again, your optimal intake is 800 calories prior to the flight. You're looking at about an 800 calories meal. And now that you understand macros, we're looking at a good composition of carbohydrates, complex carbs there, rich in protein, and some fats for sure, 20% at least. So you could modify the protein fats ratio here to 25-25. But I would really keep the carbs there, a nice rich complex carb meal to keep you full long, and the proteins to help support that as well. And that would be 1 hour prior to the flight. We've talked a lot about macronutrients, and we talk about carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. But there's a lot to be said about micronutrients as well. The brain is an incredibly complex system that is still being researched and understood more and more every day. And like the rest of the body, its ability to function well rests on our ability to maintain it and fuel it properly. Okay, so the foods that you eat therefore play a key role in keeping your brain healthy and can improve specific mental tasks like memory and concentration. And that's why we want to make sure that we get all the micronutrients that the brain and the body needs as well. So a few things that we need to keep in mind. Omega-3, we talked about it in EFA's, essential fatty acids part during the fats macronutrients. But we get omega-3 fatty acids in typically very low doses nowadays, and we need to be very mindful of how much we get of it because it's extremely important. About 60% of your brain is made of fat, and roughly half of that is the omega-3 kind. So your brain uses omega-3s to build brain and nerve cells, and these fats are essential for learning and memory. Okay, so if you don't eat much fish or anything like this, make sure that you go look for supplements that will enable you to have enough omega-3. Antioxidants, they accumulate in the brain and they improve communication between brain cells. So they also counteract the oxidative stress produced by cognitive demanding work. So your stress kind of puts a strain on your brain, and antioxidants, that which you'll find in blueberries and chocolate and coffee and tea and so on, are all there to kind of help counter that. Because your brain will want to oxidize because of the stress. Now, vitamins, I don't want to make big claims here because there's big pharma companies out there trying to sell you vitamins at the wazoo, vitamin, water, and all this. Be careful, just make sure that you have enough. If you're not sure, consult a doctor. Don't go all out crazy on this, guys, but at least, be mindful of it, be aware of it. You want to have a good amount of the B family of vitamins, for example, because they serve several roles in brain health. Vitamin C is a key to preventing mental decline and also a powerful antioxidant. Vitamin E shields the cell membranes from free radical damage, so that slows mental decline. And vitamin K is fat soluble, so you'll get, for example, like a lot of vitamin K in broccoli, but you need to have a little bit of fat to absorb it into the body, and it's a vitamin essential for forming a type of fat that's densely packed into brain cells. On a day-to-day basis, we have the very last responsibility, the ultimate responsibility to determine if we are fit to fly. Okay, nobody in the end can shove us in the cockpit of a plane. or into whichever role we're about to take responsibility for, it is our responsibility, therefore, to make sure we are fit to fly. So there's a little checklist that's been kind of distributed or supported by the FAA and many other flight regulating bodies around the world, and it's called the I'm Safe checklist. It's very basic, but it gives us an idea of where to begin looking and introspecting at ourselves, making sure that we're ready. So for illness, am I ill? Do I feel sick in any ways? And, if it could be a common cold or all the way to something else, we want to be aware of that, how it's going to impact our ability to fly. Because then, if we're ill, we might be on some medication. So, M for medication. Am I taking medication? Will it impair my thinking, judgment, or performance? Stress comes in a lot of forms, and it could be related to stress from at home. Um, am I mentally fit to fly? Am I able to deal with what's ahead? Can I devote my full attention to flying? These are a lot of questions that you have to ask yourselves, and typically that will be the tougher one to answer because, we want to go fly. Most of the time, we'll kind of overlook this or play it down. Alcohol. When did I last take a drink? Like, am I suffering from hangover? The new rules now in Canada used to be 8 hours bottle to the throttle. They've increased that to 12 because, as we've seen a little bit before, that 1 pint of beer is going to take your body almost 2 hours to digest, to get rid of from your blood. So if you've like spent the night partying and you think that you can get up the next morning and go fly, think again because you're probably still drunk. So be very careful about that, the effects of alcohol and how long it's going to linger in your blood. Alcohol will also have an effect on how you sleep, which takes us to fatigue. F for fatigue. Are you physically fatigued? Are you too tired to give you 100%? And I'm not meaning like, oh, it's too early for me to wake up, like it's not my time in the morning. No, no. But like fatigued as in, um, are you missing like 18 hours, 20 hours of sleep now? Like how empty are you running on? And finally, eating. We talked about eating and how much it affects your performance. Are you hungry? Did I eat too much? Did I eat not enough? Did I eat well enough? Do I have an indigestion? All these things really come into play. All right, guys, so this is it. Thanks again for stopping by. As always, there'll be a few review questions in the comments. As I said, there'll also be links below that will take you to these questionnaires that you can use if you're doing any layovers across multiple time zones. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer them. In the meantime, thanks again for stopping by, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you in the next chapter of The Pilot Factored.